Hello there, good morning, and welcome here to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. So we're about to start a new mini-series, as I'm going to call them. This one is called the Hard Rock 7. So basically what I'm going to be doing on this series is that I've spent some time looking at most of the hard rock bands I've listened to over the past, I guess it's going back 4.5 decades now. And I picked out 7 of them that I think, well, first of all, the most important factor is I like them. I can't really do a video on a band I don't like. I've done a few like that. When I did the Big Six, there was a band in there that I don't dislike them, but I don't really listen to them much. So, as the one guy said, you should be making comments about a band you don't know anything about. And I'm not going to disagree with him there. So, I've learned my lesson, and in this instance, I will only be picking bands that I am familiar with and like, because there would be no sense in doing them if I don't, right? So, that's the first criteria. The second criteria is that they have to have a hard rock element to their music. And to be honest, they have to have more than just a hard rock element. They have to be, at least in my mind, a hard rock band. They may have other elements, and to be honest with you, most of them do. Most hard rock bands, some play blues, some play that kind of poppy kind of I'm trying to think of a word to describe this, that kind of sex, rock, drugs, and rock and roll feeling to their music. A lot of them have that in it. Some of them have progressive elements in their music. Definitely do. Some of them actually have a little bit of folk in their music as well. So, but primarily I think of them as a hard rock band, and that was the other second criteria. The third criteria is these bands had to have some notoriety and some influence. Otherwise, I don't know how you could put them as the big hard rock 7. These are the 7 bands I think really are the bands, the go-to bands for hard rock music. So in order for them to be that way, they have to have some notoriety. They can't be some obscure band that nobody knows about, or a band that had one hit, or a band that maybe didn't quite make it to that next level. So these are the big bands. These are the ones that have a lot of notoriety. For most of them, they have a huge influence. Some of them have special influences, which I'll get into when I get into those bands. And then they have to have been, I don't like to say this, but you can tell how big a band is by how many enemies it has. So if there's a lot of people that hate them, they have to have had some notoriety, because it's hard to hate something that you don't notice. That's just the way it is. Like if a band never has an impact and you don't really hear much about them and you don't notice them, pretty hard to hate them. That's what I think. They have to be a band that at least some people can't stand. And I'm not saying that that's a criteria for picking them here, but generally speaking, I can tell when a band is a huge band because now it has enemies. So it's kind of a strange concept, but that tends to be the way it is. The bigger you are, the more enemies you get, because people don't like what you're saying, or they notice you more, so they notice what you're saying more because you're in their face all the time. That's just the way it is. So those are some of the criteria. The other criteria is they have to have been around and at least produced a certain amount of albums. Otherwise, they can't really been that notorious. They can't be really notoried that way, So I think all of these bands have had a fair number of albums. I think the least, I believe, I think there's one band I think that has only about, no, they all do. The least amount I think is about 15 albums. That's a good amount of albums. So, having explained all that, just remember these are just my opinions based on my own observations, because it's difficult to make observations from your point of view when I'm not inside you and looking from your point of view. These are bands that have had impacts on me, and in my opinion, these are the big 7. And so without further ado, these are the Hard Rock 7 that we're doing, and we're starting today with the first of these bands. And these bands are in no particular order. They're not my most favorite to my, or my least favorite to my most favorite. At this point, they're all splitting hairs anyways. They all have enough to be one of these 7 bands, so it's just splitting hairs to rank them, and I'm not going to rank them anyways. I already know how I would rank them, and there's somebody will inevitably ask me what's my favorite and what's not my favorite. So if you ask, I will tell you, but I'm not doing it for that. I'm not doing it in that particular order for any particular reason. I just want to do this little series on these 7 bands who I think deserve to have attention, and that's why I'm doing it. So anyways, so starting out, the first band on this list, and before I go a little bit further, just want to let you know there will be some honorable mentions at the end. There's about 5 or 6 bands that I considered for this role, but they were lacking in some element that made me decide against them in the end. But for the most part, the 7 are in here pretty strong, well known, lots of albums, lots of hits, lots of strength, and have had some influence or lots of influence and have notoriety for certain things. So I don't think it'll be boring at any rate. So the first band on this list is going to go back to 1972. I believe that's the year that maybe they signed their record label that year, or they came into existence. I didn't go that far back with them, but we're talking about Aerosmith. Yes, Aerosmith, the Aerosmith, still rocking today. So basically I'm going to talk about similar categories that I had with the Big 6. So we're going to talk first about these guys had 15 albums in total, 15 studio albums. They did have a lot of compilations. They also did have a fair number of live albums, but we're only going to stick with these ones. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on their albums. In fact, I'm probably not going to spend any time on their albums. I am only going to talk about the best album, which I consider to be this one. But you wouldn't be wrong if you picked Night in the Ruts or maybe Rocks. Those are really good albums too. I just think this one kind of, generally speaking, is considered their best album. Now I know that there are Aerosmith fans from the more modern era, their more pop kind of ballad era, but since I never really liked that era of Aerosmith, I'm not going to spend much time on that era. They decided to go that route when they straightened themselves out, and they made a lot of money doing that, and no kudos to them for that, but that music really doesn't interest me that much. This stuff does. So Aerosmith's Toys in the Attic from 1975, I think, is probably considered by a fair number of people to be their best album. And if it isn't their best album, it's clearly one of their best albums. Okay, the last album they made is Music from Another Dimension. Yeah, that's what it is, From Another Dimension. And I don't know much about it, and I don't own it, so I can't really make too many comments about the album, other than to say that it's been a while. I think this album was released in 2012. If I'm wrong, please correct me. So for me, the other thing that I wanted to mention is their classic era. So their classic era probably started with the Aerosmith, the first album, and went through to arguably 1979, so 73 to 79. Some people may go further and go to 1982. I'm not complaining about that. To stretch a bit, but it's still well within the parameters of them. Okay, so the members of this band, I think there's been maybe 10 total. So, of course, Steve Tyler and Joe Perry are the main two guys here. Also, Brad Whitford, Tom Hamilton, Joey Kramer, Rick Dufour, Ray Tabano, and Jimmy Crespo have also played in this band. So what's that? That's 2, 4, 6, 7, 8 guys. That's not bad for a band that's spanning now 51 years to only have had 8 members. Most bands, some of these progressive bands, the list of members is 2 arms long. But in this case, yeah, pretty much the original guys plus a few other guys filling in at different times. Now, what is the status of this band right now? So this band, the last thing I heard about them, they were planning on doing a tour, their final tour, final tour number 6 or whatever it is, I don't know. All these bands are the same. They do a final tour, and then they do a finale tour, and then they do an encore final tour, and then they do another history final tour, and then it just, because the money's too good, they just can't walk away from it. And when you're making money, it's highly addictive. I don't suffer from that addiction because I'm not making any money, but I know from a fact that people I've known my whole life, they just can't put it down. They just love that money. They do. And they love the notoriety. And they love the action. And it's what they do best. Let's face it. If they weren't rock stars, they'd probably be behind the Crowbar Saloon, a lot of these guys. But anyways, today's Aerosmith is the first of these bands. So this one's a little bit longer of an episode because of the explanations at the beginning. It's a good band, lots of really hard stuff. They've got songs that are like rockin' hard. They tend to fall within that category as well of what I call sex, drugs, and rock and roll music. Basically, a lot of their songs are nowadays probably inappropriate, but back then, detailing all the girls they had and all this kind of stuff, and lots of sexual innuendo, lots of that kind of stuff. And they are one of the bands that started that. But their music is catchy, lots of really good guitar riffing, really catchy songs, hooks galore all over the place. Lots of big hit radio songs too, more so now than ever. If you look at the number of hits they've had since they went that kind of pop ballad way of making their music, it's totally off the charts, the number of hits. And this time period they had hits, don't get me wrong, but it's maybe a dozen at the most. Now it's just like everything they throw out, although they haven't thrown out anything for over a decade, but you people get the point. So this band, to me, I think of them as a hard rock band first, a sex, drugs, and rock and roll band also. And the pop ballad era, I don't really think of them as that, but I know that for the last couple of decades or more, probably longer than they were a hard rock band, they've been more of a ballad band. Although even on those albums, they do have the occasional, especially going further back. The further in they got, or the further along they got, the more ballady and the more poppy they got. But those first 2 or 3 albums after the classic era, Get a Grip, Vacations, Permanent Vacations, those albums, they still had some hard rock and stuff on there too. Not as much, but they did, and even that was toned down to a little bit of a poppy sound to it. But this is a band, if you've never listened to this band and you like that hard rock element, you got to give Aerosmith a listen to. But I can't imagine there's too many out there that haven't at least heard something from these guys. They have so many hits and so many well-known songs. So today's pick was Aerosmith. How do you guys feel about it? Would you put them in this big 7? Is this a band that you think deserves the notoriety that they get? Obviously, their rockin' flavor influenced quite a few bands as they went along. To me, they're kind of a the best way to describe Aerosmith is a heavier Rolling Stones band. That's the way I look at them. Very similar, lots of similarities between the two bands, but these guys rock harder. Stones have their harder stuff too, but I would go, if we were going to give it a modern term, I would say a lot of the Stone stuff is kind of power pop, where this stuff is right into the hard rock. There's a couple of songs that border on that metal song as well, but great. This is a great album too. If you haven't heard this album, you got to listen to it. So anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this first episode of this series, the Hard Rock 7, featuring Aerosmith. If you did, please like and subscribe. It's much appreciated. Leave any comments about this band you may have in the comment section down below. If you got any other comments, let me know. I know some of you will probably try to guess what other bands are coming. And you're probably going to nail a lot of them, because I tend to wear the stuff I like on my sleeve. There are some bands that some of you are going to put in that comment, say that band has to be in this list or it's not legit. That's fine, but you don't forget the first qualification. I have to like them. If I don't like them, there's no point in me doing anything about them, because I'm going to be negative about it. So I will not put anybody's band in there just because they think they should be in there. These are the ones I think should be in there. They're the ones I'm sticking with. So have yourself a good day. Please like and subscribe, and we will see you on episode 2 tomorrow.